All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the next lesson. And this is going to finish up our section on ethics. This is existentialist ethics, looking at the works of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. And we'll start with Camus. Again, as a bit of background, these guys are writing in France just after World War II. So witnessing the war has definitely affected them, um, as well as the ideas of personal identity being based on politics or based on one's belief system, some of which we are seeing today. So the whole idea that these guys said is, don't look outside for your belief system, but use your own reflection to find it. And they go on about how following the beliefs that others tell you will only lead you into trouble. So let's see how that happens and what they think are some of the solutions to come by it. Okay, if I can get the. That's all right. So the theory that they are both under, even though they have very different views, is existentialism, right? And as some of you saw, I know I answered one question about it in the forum. The premier idea of existentialism is that existence precedes essence. And in other words, what that means is that we exist in the world before we know who we are. Who we are, what we are, is not determined prior to our birth. It is not determined, by the society we are in, but rather we exist first, and then we, through that, get to determine. Sorry, to deal with baby. Then we get to determine who we want to be and what we want to be in this world. So we'll get more into that in a minute. So the first guy we're going to look at is Albert Camus. And so Camus, you can see there, he was born in 1913 and lived to 1960. So he died a little bit early. He was only 47 when he died, but he did write quite a bit, and he was definitely seen as a literary figure, as somebody, who really followed his beliefs. Perhaps his most famous work is called The Stranger or The Outsider, and it's a good novel if you guys ever want to read it. But he also has, Sartre has one called The Plague. We'll get there later. Anyway, so the reading I had you guys do from Camus was a short essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. And in this essay, Camus talks about the man who does the most living. And for him, the most living is gaining as many experiences as possible, right? We're only on the planet for a short time. You may as well do experience as much of it as you can, right? And he already says that this is my view. This is not necessarily how anybody else should live their lives. Rather, what people should do is look at their lives and see, okay, what are my values and how can I live best in accordance with my values? How can I live in such a way that the people involved will, or sorry, how can I live in such a way that I am fulfilling my values and I am living what I think is a rich and good life, right? Not based on what other people say, not based on what my parents say, but based on what are my values and how does that turn in to a good life for me. So he points out that life is absurd. It's contradictory. The life we live seems to be very silly. in a lot of ways. It doesn't make, basically, when he's saying absurd, it's saying it doesn't make sense, right? So it is contradictory. We're being told to do things one way, and now, we're told don't waste any time, and then we're in a pandemic. All we can do is find ways to occupy the time, things like that. So the absurdity of life, he says, leads one to think in terms of what? First is terms of revolt, right? We see that life seems ridiculous, seems contradictory, and so the first thing that we tend to do is we want to struggle against it. We want to say, okay, if it's so ridiculous, I want to fight back against that ridiculousness. I want to fight back against the contradictions in life that I constantly see. And then he goes on and talks about, okay, and if you see this, if you realize it's ridiculous, if you realize it's absurd, then you look at your freedom. Okay. It's like, okay, but what am I free to do about it? I can't change the way life is, but I can change the way I live my life. I can choose how I want to live my life and what I want to do, right? And, a really cheesy example, but it's like some of us, we live in a society, and traditionally guys have short hair, girls have long hair. So if you're a guy and you grow your hair long, that is a freedom in you're expressing your freedom despite other people thinking that may not be the appropriate thing. And that's just a very small example, but the whole point is that you are free to choose what rules and what norms you follow and what you don't, and you have the freedom to choose your values for yourself rather than just following the values that others have around you. And finally, it's like, okay, if life is absurd and you have your freedom, then what is your passion? Because it is your passion. Following your passion will give you a much richer life than pushing down your passion, than not following your passion, right? So the whole idea here is that the passion becomes the driving force, right? You have the freedom to follow your passion because you revolted against the system, because the things as they stand are completely absurd or ridiculous. So if you're following your passion, what is your passion and how can you follow that fully? Okay. And so that gets us to Sisyphus. Now, as it stands, Sisyphus was, this is a Greek myth, and Sisyphus, what happened was he died. When he went to the underworld, he just he said to Hades, who was the god of the underworld, let me go back to my wife and chastise her or for the way that she treated my dead body after I passed. And Hades says, okay, sounds a little petty, but I'll let you do it. And so Sisyphus goes back up. He sees his wife, but once he's back in the world of the living, he's like, oh, I actually prefer it up here. So he starts living again in the land of the living, and Hades comes and finds him and says, what are you doing? This wasn't part of our deal. And so brings him back down and says, okay, because you misbehaved, because you reneged on your word, and I can't trust you, I'm going to punish you. And so what his punishment was he was forced to take this boulder and push it to the top of the hill. Only every time he almost made it to the top of the hill, the rock would roll down again to the bottom and he would have to start all over, right? And so in Western history, because people knew of this myth, because this has survived, the saying a Sisyphean task is saying like a pointless task, right? Because no matter how many times you push the rock up, it's hard work. It takes him weeks or months. His fingers hurt, his body hurts the whole time. And just as he's about to complete it, he needs to start over. So a Sisyphean task is one that is unending and seems futile. And so, Camus is trying to shift this myth on his head, because what he's saying is, okay, we see him doing this. We see that there's no external point to him pushing the rock up the hill, except for the fact that the god of the underworld has told him he needs to do it. And so he's stuck doing it. But we can see that the punishment of pushing it up the hill is tragic only if the character is conscious in reflection, right? So doing a meaningless task is only painful if you look at what the meanings of your tasks are. It's only painful if you're asked, what is the purpose of what I am doing, right? If you're just going through the motions, then there's no real punishment. But if you're saying, okay, I'm going through the motions, I'm putting in my effort, and I'm still not accomplishing anything, that seems to be a punishment. That seems to be a way of getting, yeah, how do I put this? That's being discouraged, right? You put all this time, this effort into something only for it to fall down again and not have any tangible results. And so we can see that as frustrating if we see the actual goal as getting the boulder to the top of the hill. So Camus starts to point out that, rather than seeing this as futile, in the reflection, we can choose how to interpret the situations that we're in. So for Sisyphus, yes, he can see it as pointless, and he can see it as something that causes him to, how do I put this? Causes him to be in despair because his work doesn't have any purpose, right? Causes him to feel useless despite putting in all the hard work. On the other hand, what Camus is saying is that, at the same time, Sisyphus can say, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, but I choose to do this. I choose to put my full energy into this, even knowing that it's not going to get to the top. And, as I'm climbing to the top, I could look around from the mountain and enjoy the view, and so on and so forth. And so even though it's painful, even though it doesn't achieve a goal, Camus ends his essay with saying, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. And his point is that we can interpret this for our own lives as well. That we can figure out, okay, we're all stuck in a pandemic. We're stuck doing online only classes, as you guys know, so on and so forth. And so then the question becomes, how do we interpret the situation we're in a way that is uplifting to us? How do we interpret the situation we're in a way that we can apply our passion to it and feel like we are doing the right thing, even if we don't have power over the external situation? How can we see what we are doing as something that is good and that is following our passion rather than just doing what we are told? Okay. So that's what I wanted you guys to get out of the myth of Sisyphus. Now, if we move on to the reading from your textbook, Existentialism is a Humanism. That's by this guy. His name is Jean-Paul Sartre, and he always had a lazy eye. Um, but that didn't stop it from being lazy. Anyway, that's another story. We're not getting into that now. But yes, existentialism is a humanism. So again, he's writing this right after World War II in France. So he experienced the German occupation of France as well as the liberation at the end of World War II, and he saw the dangers of people following um, political parties, following governments, and not thinking for themselves. So his version of existentialism has five basic principles. The first is that we are totally free, right? And this happens in different ways, but he says that our minds are completely free in everything we do. We make decisions, you know, and we are free in choosing those decisions. We are free in choosing how we see the world, so on and so forth. His second point of existentialism is that without God to define us, we must define ourselves. And granted, he is an atheist, and we'll get more into God and that relationship to ethics when we do philosophy of religion, which we will get to. But for Sartre's point, he says, you know, without a God, if you don't believe in God, or even if you do but believe he's out of the picture, God doesn't define us. It's not up to some external being to determine who we are. Rather, we must define ourselves. We must determine who we are for ourselves. And he continues, we are completely responsible for our own actions, but we prescribe morality through our actions. So for every action, we have a choice and we are responsible for that choice. But at the same time, in every choice we make, we are saying it is good if other people choose this way in the same situation. So we are saying, yes, this is the right choice for me to make, but we're also saying other people should make the choice the same way if they were in this situation. But he says, or the fourth rule, without an outside force to determine our values, the task is ours. It is up to us to determine what our values are, but this comes with an uncertainty, because if there's no one external telling us what we should value and it's only up to us, then we also need to be clear in what we're doing. And sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're like, well, I don't have the resources to know which value is better than the other. And so that, he says, can cause doubt, can cause despair. But he says that we should celebrate that we create our essence and our values. That this anguish and despair should not be a cause for despair. It's actually a cause for celebration, because it is an admission that we do have the freedom to do this, that we do have the freedom to determine who we are and what we value, rather than having it forced on us by someone else. Okay, so again, the phrase he uses to define existentialism is that existence proceeds essence, or precedes essence. So this is for human beings as opposed to manufactured objects, right? Because manufactured objects have their purpose or telos before they are made, right? They're made to serve a purpose. So a paper cutter is made to cut paper. A stapler is made to staple. So it is known what these things are meant to do, and then they exist because they're created to fulfill that purpose, right? Whereas for humans, he'll say that we don't have a purpose, we don't have something we should be doing before we exist. Rather, we exist first. We are thrown into the world, and then as we are thrown into the world, our actions determine who we truly are. Our values determine who we truly are, right? So our essence as who we truly are for Sartre is determined by our actions, it's determined by our decisions. And so those then compose our essence. So unlike these things, which have their purpose and then get made, we are made, or we are in the world first, we already exist, and then we have to figure out what our purpose is. Okay. So each man is a particular example of the concept of man. And this is man in the general sense, including women, including all conscious beings, actually. So without God, nothing can determine our essence or purpose besides ourselves. And therefore, our essence comes after existence. A quote from the reading: man exists and only afterwards defines himself. And this is not only what he or she conceives himself to be, but also what he or she wills themselves to be, right? So it's not only determined by interpretation, by action, because it's one of these things to say, oh, I'm a surfer, right? If we want to define ourselves, oh, I'm a surfer, right? But if all you do is you have your boards available, but you never actually go out in the surf, you're not really a surfer, right? You may be a surf hobbyist, but you're not a surfer. So likewise, what Sartre is saying here is it's not just what you think about yourself that defines yourself. It is what actions do you make, right? How are you acting in the world? How are your decisions choosing, how you see the world? And so we'll get more to that in a minute. But again, it's not just how one is viewing themselves and what they're saying about themselves, but it's also what are they doing, right? And who we are is done as much by what we do as by what we say or think. Okay, our actions also reveal how we feel all of mankind should be, right? If we think what we do is right, we think that it is right for everybody. And so, in this way, every action involves all of humanity because the whole point is our decisions are not only those for who we are, but saying in this situation, everybody should act in this way. So, but again, he says that because we're having to make these decisions and we don't necessarily have all the information we need when we are, that we run into anguish or despair or anxiety at the responsibility of making the choice and the fact that we need to make the choice, that the choices need to be made. And this gets into his concept of freedom, right? But we can also see how his idea that when we do an action, we're saying everybody should do this way. It's somewhat similar to Kant, but it's not as strict as Kant. So it's saying that we're saying that everybody should do this action because I'm doing it, but we're not saying that it is a logical necessity that we need to act this way. So for Sartre, one must take a stand against what he calls quietism, right? And quietism is a lack of action when one is paralyzed by the responsibility of choice. So if you are choosing, either you need to make up past work or you need to get an incomplete, but you don't know what to do, and instead you don't do anything. You just, you sit there until it's too late to make a decision. And he'll say, that is a decision too. But this is the thing that creates, Sartre says, is the most wrong. And he's not going to say it's wrong. He'll use the term bad faith, which we'll get to in a minute. But he thinks that this getting rid of one's own responsibility or not paying attention to one's own responsibility is one of the things that is a problem, right? If one is not following one's responsibility and saying, oh, I can't do anything about it, oh, I don't have any choice, then you are giving up your own freedom and you're not taking your responsibilities seriously. So one of Sartre's most famous quotes, and if there's one on the test, this will probably be it, is, we are condemned to be free. Okay, what does this mean? We are condemned means that we did not create the situation ourselves. We are free. The one thing we didn't choose was to be in this world and to be free. So we are thrown in this world and we are free in that we have the options around it, but that also makes us responsible for everything we do, right? Because we have the freedom, we are responsible for all the consequences of this freedom, right? And so the example he gives is, again, just out of World War II, so he uses this as an example, but a choice of a son, or a choice of a man. And this man had a brother that was fighting in the war and already died, against the Nazis. But he also has a 70, 75-year-old mother at home, who needs a bit of care. And so he says, okay, when we look at this man has a choice, right? That either he can join the army and avenge his brother, and you're helping a larger group, you're helping your country, but there's a greater uncertainty, right? You don't know if you're going to win the war, you don't know if you're going to come back alive, and so you don't know what the results will be. The other option would be to stay and care for his elderly mother, and that is concrete, with the known result that, okay, my mother will be cared for and immediate, but at the same time, I won't know what would have happened had I gone to help my country. Okay. But what he'll say, what Sartre says, is there is no right choice here. Either choice is right if it is the decision of the man, but he needs to take full responsibility for that decision. Because if he chooses either one, if he joins the army but spends the whole time feeling guilty that he should be at home with his mother, then he's not going to be a good soldier. At the same time, if he stays and cares for his mother, but thinks, oh, I should have been fighting alongside with my countrymen for the sake of France, for the sake of my people, then he's not being authentic in either. So what Sartre's going to say is that the choice is there and there is no right answer, but whatever choice one makes, one should stick by it and one should give all of their passion to it. Because if you're continually thinking you made the wrong choice, that's also living in what he calls bad faith, and that is not fully endorsing or fully supporting your own decisions. So that's also the difference between authentic and inauthentic, right? So authentic is in good faith when you make the decision and you fully support it with your passion, with your energy. Where something is inauthentic and in bad faith, if you made a decision you don't fully agree with and you are just going through the motions, but you don't fully support the decision you yourself made. It's also important to note what he means by we are condemned to be free, because he he will say that we are free in every situation we're in. And one of the things he brings up is the example of somebody who is tied up in a prison. And, he'll say that person is still free in a sense because, okay, they can't move their hands and legs, they can't change where they are, but they are still free in determining how they react to their captors. They are still free, or do they have sympathy or anger to the people that have imprisoned them? Do they have, do they have this feeling of despair, or do they want to choose to be happy? So Sartre will say you are free in any situation, even if your only freedom is choosing how you're thinking about the situation that you're in. So he will say that we are always free in every situation, and that in some we just need to pay more attention to our own thoughts on it rather than um, the external physical situation. Because either way, regardless, we are always free in how we interpret it, and we are always free in choosing our reactions to it. Okay, so he says there is no way of getting out of being free. So that freedom also comes with a responsibility, because it means not only are you responsible for your actions, but you are also responsible for your own thoughts and your own way that you are interpreting the world that you are in. Okay. That's all I have for you guys right now on Sartre, but we will continue. Again, any questions you post in the forum this week, I will answer. I've answered 4 already. Actually, let me go and try and see if I can show you guys what I said to these questions. All right. So first, by Alona, what does it mean that belief in the absurd is tantamount? Again, this is a review right now, but it means that one must believe in the absurdity of life in order to be able to act with the ridiculousness in some meaningful way. And again, for the existentialists, the meaning that life has is the meaning that we give it. So, what does it mean that there is no faith that cannot be surmounted by scorn? Basically, that there is no belief system that cannot be subjected to doubt and criticism, and that we should apply both doubt and criticism to every system of belief so that we see where the flaws are and we see where they stand, and we have the ability to make the choices of what is best or most meaningful for us. What is myriad? Myriad is a variety of forms and possibilities. It's a word that means a large and varied collection of things. Okay. Layla's questions. What does it mean when it said every truth and action imply both an environment and human subjectivity? This means that for any situation, there's the context that it occurs in, the situation in the world, that's the environment, which um, is, okay, where in the world are you? What does society expect of you? How much money do you have? How are others treating you? That's the environment. And then the human subjectivity is, we each have our own interpretation of the world, and our own emotional states and everything else that adds to the way I experience the situation different than you. Okay. Again, what do they mean when they say existence precedes essence? This is good review. Again, this is that we are in this world before it is determined what our essence or true nature is. So in this sense, the existentialists believe that we build who we are and what defines us rather than having it defined for us before we make our actions and live our lives. And again, when it said man is responsible for themselves, they're only responsible for the individual selves or all of man. So for Sartre, we are only responsible for our own actions and decisions. But Sartre will also say that we should treat every action we make as if it were an example to everyone else, right? But how would you act if you knew everyone was making the same decision, right? It's like if you decide not to post these questions, that's fine. That's a decision for you. But if nobody in the class posts the questions, I can't answer them. I can't help you guys. And the situation gets worse for everyone. All right, we got one more set of questions from Brianna. So again, what is the difference between essence and existence? Essence is your essential nature, who you truly are. What is, yeah, who are you in essence? Who are you, that is the same that you were 10 years ago, that will be the same in 10 years? Who are you that isn't determined just by your external situation? But existence is just the fact that you exist in the world, right? The very fact I see your names on the list, I know you're existing in this class. The very fact that you guys think, a la Descartes, I think therefore I am, means you exist. But again, for Sartre, what you are existing isn't determined until you decide that, define it for yourselves, both through your thoughts, but even more so through your actions. Okay, is a man's existence judged by how others perceive his actions, or by his intention and how he perceives them? Again, for the existentialist, it will definitely be the second one. It will be how he perceives his actions and his intentions, but he needs to take full responsibility for his actions and his intentions. Again, I don't know who says passion and interest are bad. What they're saying is you should not base your passions and interests on the decisions and the values of others. That you should first determine those for yourself before following the decisions or the values of others with your passion. All right, that's all I've got for you guys today. Um, I know you're still working on the midterms. Again, if you have questions, please get them up in this forum by the end of the week. And yeah, and do let me know if you have any questions on the midterm. I'll talk to you guys on Thursday. All right. Aloha.